Hello and welcome. My apologies, I was on mute apparently. My name is Angela Washuka. Welcome to NBO Litfest, which is presented by Book Bank. I'm a founder at Book Bank Trust, and this festival is anchored in Nairobi's public libraries and is also a celebration of the Macmillan Memorial Library's 90th year. If you're new to the work that we're doing here at Book Bank to transform public libraries, please visit bookbank.org to explore a grand vision for these libraries. For now, some house rules, always fun to begin with. Your mics will remain muted for the duration of the conversation. This is also a pre-recorded session, and so it won't feature a Q&A session at the end of the discussion. But what you could do is share your questions online. You can share these on Twitter with the hashtag NBOLitfest, and we'll get to the two panelists. We're also social, so you can connect with us in addition to Twitter on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Our handle is the Book Bank, and the hashtag, like I said, is NBOLitfest. We'd also love your feedback, so some polls will be popping up on your screen at various points during this event. There's likely one now on your screen asking you how you got here, so please share your feedback with us. We're going to be handing over to Ciku Kimeria shortly, who will be in conversation with Nanjala and Nyabola. But before we do that, I'd like to thank our funders, Sharjah World Book Capital in Sharjah, Sigrid Rousing Trust in London, and the Embassy of the Netherlands in Nairobi. We are also partnering with some institutions to bring this programming together, including the British Council, Glasgow Women's Library, Sahifa Jano, Baraza Media Lab, and Paukwa, Asanteni Sana. So today, the conversation will be between Ciku Kimeria and Nanjala Nyabola. Nanjala is a writer and researcher based in Nairobi, and her work focuses on the intersection between technology, media, and society. She's published in several academic journals, including the African Security Review and the Women's Studies Quarterly, and contributed to numerous edited collections. Nanjala also writes commentary for publications like The Nation, Al Jazeera, the Boston Review, and others. She's the author of Digital Democracy, Analog Politics, How the Internet Era is Transforming Politics in Kenya, which was published by Z Books in 2018, and Traveling While Black, Essays Inspired by Light on the Moon, which was published by Hearst Books in 2020. That book is also available actually on our website, bookbank.org/NBOLitfest. We have a bookshop there, which is a collection of work by all the participants at NBO Litfest. So please support her by buying her book. Ciku Kimeria, who she'll be in conversation with, is a longtime contributor to Quartz Africa and has authored almost 40 articles for the site on topics as wide-ranging as the perils of traveling with an African passport to the optimism inspired by Africa's first NFT art collections. She's the author of 2 novels and has written for a variety of outlets, including African Arguments, OK Africa, and the Africa Report. Ciku has a wealth of communication and project management experience, having worked for and served as a communication advisor to Dalberg Advisors, Open Society Initiative of West Africa, and the Africa Agriculture and Trade Investment Fund. She has a Bachelor of Science degree in management from MIT and speaks English, Swahili, and French. Karibuni sana, and the person you'll also be seeing on your screen is Liz, and she'll be helping us with the sign language interpretation. Enjoy this conversation.
Hi, Nanjala. It's so nice to be speaking to you today. I've just been so excited about our discussion. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you, Ciku. How are you?
I'm great. I think to start us off on this discussion, because I'm sure people are interested to hear what are we going to focus on. I would like to start us off with a quote from your book, because I think that's just great for setting the context. So I have here Traveling While Black by Nanjala Nyabola, and I'll move to page 24, where she says, a Black African woman is almost always at the bottom of whatever constructed hierarchy of value a society has in place. And so when I travel, I am more likely to be viewed as an object of pity than as a target for theft or bribery. So I'll pause there. I'd love to hear your reactions and a bit more on what you were thinking as you wrote this.
You know, one of the things that's always very weird for me when I'm overseas is finding all these things that different societies have in common, and all the things that show up that are different. And one of the things that's always been almost always been is people's shortcut to understanding what it means to be an African woman is often through the lens of pity. And I think a lot of it has to do with how stories about African women get told in popular culture, in the media, in the public sphere. And so people always, the entry point for a lot of people is feeling bad, and seeing, wanting to help, wanting to save African women. And whenever I travel, it's always just so interesting that, especially other African countries, a lot of the times we're consuming information about each other through the lens of, Western media, through the lens of foreign media. So we also treat each other the same way. And it's always like, whenever I go abroad, it's always, when I say I'm Kenyan, it's always, oh, are you guys still fighting? Are you guys still, whatever kind of thing? The last time that Kenya was on France 24, whatever it was, sexual violence and things like that. So when I was writing about this, I was thinking about my experiences, especially, going to North America, Europe, but also in, South Africa, and having this reaction of that initial reaction of people just the interaction with me starting off from a place of pity. And there must be some reason why you are, people, you are on the road, some other overarching reason, and not necessarily just that, curiosity of wanting to see what these other parts of the world were like. So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about how African womanhood is constructed in popular culture, is constructed in media cultures, and how, there's not that richness of personhood. There's not that, diversity of experience. There's not that complexity, really. And one of the underlying themes of this book is that it's that I wanted it to be a complicated book, not necessarily resting on simple narratives or simple assumptions. I really, really wanted to tell a complicated story, because I think it's one of the things that people really steal from Africans in written cultures, in media cultures, is our right to be complicated. So that was the thinking behind that particular sentence, but also just the entire book.
Sounds great. And I want to get us to the larger question on, and you've touched a bit on this, but the larger question on the motivation behind writing this book. Because when someone picks up the book, they might think, Traveling While Black, oh, maybe she'll tell us all the places she went to and how it was and what it's like traveling as a Black person. But the book has so much depth. So you talk about xenophobia, you talk about refugees, you talk about traveling as a woman, you talk about safety, you even talk about general concerns that some women have when it comes to backpacking, under the where will I pee question, things that men wouldn't have to think about. But you also talk about traveling from a professional experience. So you mentioned, like, when you're in Haiti for work, or when you went to Palermo to try and understand the humanitarian crisis that was happening. So I'd love to know, what was your big motivation? Why do you think, what drove you to write this book, and especially to explore the different angles that you did?
The main driving force was that I had been working in and around refugee migrant protection for a good 7-8 years. I started during the post-election violence in Kenya, working with IDPs in 2007, working with IDPs in Nairobi, went to university for it, had done all of these things, but I had always had this frustration that whenever I wanted to make the professional commitment that this is what I was going to do, I would encounter these invisible barriers, walls, and a lot of it has to do with the way the professional organizations that work with refugees and migrants there's a racial element to the way the work is structured and the way the work is done that doesn't really get honestly confronted in multiple ways. So for example, if you were thinking about African migrants and refugees dying in the Mediterranean Sea, and you thought to yourself as an African, hey, this is an important issue, I would like to go and work, on providing protection for these people, supporting whatever. You wouldn't be able to do that in Libya. You wouldn't be able to do that in Italy. You wouldn't be able to do that in Spain. You wouldn't be able to do it in Morocco. You wouldn't be able to get in. First of all, you wouldn't be able to get in. You wouldn't be able to get to the senior levels of some of these organizations. You would have had to had internship when you were an undergrad, which means you would have had to be able to afford to work for free. None of the internships are in Kenya or in Uganda or in whatever. All of the internships are in Geneva, are in New York, are in whatever. So you wouldn't have been able to get those jobs because you wouldn't have been able to A, get a visa that allows you to volunteer, B, the cost. Like, there were all of these structural things. I would look around and I'd be like, one time I was invited to go because I had a law degree, and I had at the time I had time, and someone I knew from law school who was a commercial lawyer was going to Greece for 2 weeks to offer free legal assistance to African migrants refugees who are in Greece. And she emailed me, she said, because she knew that I had a real passion for the subject, she emailed me, she was like, do you want to come out to Greece with me for 2 weeks? I said, and it's, they pay for everything except for your flight and your visa. And I said, sure. And, looked into the process, and they were like, there's no way that the Greek embassy in Nairobi is going to give me a visa to go and volunteer for 2 weeks as a lawyer. They would need me to apply for a work visa, and then I would have to do all of these other things. And all of these frustrations just kept coming up in multiple ways. And at the same time, watching this thing unfold whereby Somali Ethiopian people were getting burnt to death in South Africa, and people were dying in the Sahara, and people were dying in the Mediterranean Sea. And there was always this there's a crisis in migration that's happening about race, and I want to be part of the solution, and I can't get an in. And so at the beginning of 2019, when I got the book deal, I said to the editor, I need to say goodbye to this shape of this dream. I need to say goodbye to the shape of this dream. I think that it's time to let it go. It's you're banging your head against a brick wall. And I wanted the book to be that sort of goodbye to the space, that I wouldn't be leaving it in this form. I think the heart for advocacy for refugees will always be there. I think it's something that's always going to be part of how I do the work, but it's just no longer going to be in the professional way that I had envisioned it, coming up. And so that's what the book is thinking about, because in my experience, all of these things are connected. All of these things that make it possible for xenophobia against other Africans in South Africa, in Kenya, all the things that make it possible for Haitians to be bullwhipped, at the border in the US, for, people from Indonesia to be corralled in these migrant camps in Australia, down to how we get treated when we go to apply for visas at the embassy, how we get treated when we show up at the border. All of those things are connected. And the connecting thread in them is racism, and wanting to show through this very broad, sweeping, gaze, look, this is the thread that runs through all of these things. But then to do that, I didn't want people to get to the end of the book and think, oh my God, being Black is so terrible, because it's really not. I love it. And I love being a Black woman. I love being an African woman. So there are essays in there that are really just, I hope, funny. And I hope, like with the Bessie had, celebratory, like it's not us. We're not the problem. And I wanted people to get to the end of the book and to get that. We're not the problem. Being Black is great. Being a Black woman is fantastic. But there's something that's happening out there that needs to be addressed. So that's the long-winded answer.
That's interesting. And you talk about, I would love to hear more about especially visas. I think for the listener, visas might be the main interaction that they've had when they're thinking of traveling. Because maybe many of the listeners have tried to travel for just for leisure, not really. Maybe for when they travel for work, the company sponsored them, so they know the challenges there. But travel might be the first place where they've encountered these challenges. So I'd love to hear from you about visas, including, because what I loved about your book was it was essays, but it was also the history. So I'd love to hear from you what the history of visas are. And you talk about how it stems from the fear of countries that conquered and invaded us now being scared of us conquering and invading and blackifying or brownifying their countries. So I think it's such an interesting debate there.
I mean, but seriously, think about it. The one example that I always give is Dominic Cummings, who was Boris Johnson's advisor, senior advisor. His wife is the granddaughter of the last British governor of Kenya, Evelyn Barry.
Evelyn Barry. Oh, I have no idea.
So when we think about, we're not talking about ancient histories. We're talking about fairly recent histories of Europeans traipsing around the world, you know, doing whatever and invading and reorganizing and hurting and all of that stuff. It's not ancient history. And yet, in the last 60 years, the pathways to legal travel, legal migration to the West for non-white people have all but disappeared. The Schengen visa is structured in such a way, when you look at the rejection rates, and I think the upside is that because of the way the bureaucracy is structured around a lot of these things, they make the rejection rates public. They have the data. And so we wonder why it is that a young kid who, you know, has, when European North Americans were doing it, it was exploration. But when young African men have that spirit of curiosity, young African women have that spirit of wanting to see the world, we tell them that the world is closed to them, that you cannot go to South America, you cannot go to Asia, you cannot go, the world is closed to you because exploration is not a thing for people like you. And you look at the numbers, I put in the Canadian numbers because this was one of the ones that really shocked a lot of people to realize how much of the disparity it was, that the average global rejection rate for Canadian student visas is 39%, so about 1 in every 3. The rejection rate for Africans is 78%. There are some countries where the rejection rate is 100%.
I saw Somalia and those 2 countries you listed.
Mozambique, 100% rejection rate.
So you pay all that money and you get rejected.
And you don't get a refund. You don't get even, you know, like points, frequent flyer points. You applied, you know, the next one will be easier. No, your money is gone. And that's the money, that's not even the money that you spend getting to the embassy, the money that you spend. You know, I was talking to a Sudanese friend who was writing about how, you know, Sudan is huge. And if you wanted to apply for a student visa, you have to go to Khartoum. So it's the 1-day trip into Khartoum, it's the hotel. Some countries don't have embassies. Temi from Nigeria, Temi Tayo, has written a really good essay for African Arguments about this, that this guy had to from Benin, if you wanted to apply for a UK visa, you had to go to Nigeria, spend the night in Nigeria, did all of that stuff and still had his visa rejected. Still had his visa rejected and no appeal, no nothing. In 2018, I think it was half or just more than half of every single African applicant who tried to go to the African Studies Association conference to the UK had their visas rejected. It's a huge, huge problem. And I think that people walk away from these embassies thinking that something's wrong with them. I've been to embassies when, you know, nowadays when they do the interview, unfortunately, it's not private. So you're in the room and you can hear a person being asked, you know, are you going to come back? How much money do you have in the bank? And it's, unfortunately, it's usually, you know, other Africans who have been hired for these roles because they're going to be a little bit more harder on each other. And so anyway, you're sitting there and you're hearing this conversation, and then you see the person leaving, with their shoulders slumped, and they think, well, there must be something wrong with me. And there's nothing wrong with you. There's just all of the roads the world is closing around us. And there's a paranoia about arrival from places, from Africa, from Asia, from South America. And that's kind of, and you're kind of a victim of that paranoia. You're kind of, people, a lot of the times these rules are put in place because they can. And I know this is a long-winded answer, but I just want to add one last thing. You saw this happening with the UK regulations on COVID this week. They said all African travelers, the initial rule was that no African countries' vaccination certificates would be recognized. That if you got vaccinated in Kenya, some people had to get vaccinated again, because there's a guy who tweeted at me and he was saying, I had Sinopharm in UAE and they're telling me they don't recognize Sinopharm, so I had to get vaccinated again. I've had 4 vaccines.
Oh my God, that's so ridiculous.
It's not, you look at the policy and you look at the facts, it's not grounded in facts. It's because they can. It's because who's going to stick up for the African traveler? Who's going to is the African Union going to speak up for our boys and girls who are dying in the maternity? They haven't so far. Are they going to speak up for Haitians who are being beaten and nobody's speaking up for them the way that they need to be defended? And so these are some of the issues that I wanted to really highlight to people, that I could write you a great story about how I was at the border and speak about myself specifically, but I wanted people to read this and realize this is a systemic issue, and I can save myself, but it won't fix the problem. And you can save yourself and it won't fix the problem. The solution comes from us thinking collectively.
Yeah.
What is the world that we're trying to build, and how do we fix that together?
And I think what you're saying is also it's sombering, but also so depressing, because so you've said the world has closed up and who knows what it will look like after COVID, but the expectation is that it will even be much worse, because it was already difficult for people with certain types of passports to get access to the West. And now you layer that with this vaccine you're taking, we're not accepting. This country of yours, you've not even vaccinated X% of your population, so we won't let you in. So you can just imagine it's going to get more and more closed up. So that's now when we're talking about the West. But I want us now to even move to a depressing, even more kind of like saddening state, because what are we seeing when we come to inter-Africa travel, but also belonging? You've talked about this quite a bit, about belonging in countries. So you talked about like the Sudanese population in Kenya, the Somali population in Kenya, different groups of people who even in Africa and in their own countries, they don't belong. You've talked about xenophobia in South Africa, where Africans whose countries really tried to help South Africa during apartheid are now, being told that you're the ones who have come and destroyed, that you're taking our jobs and so on. So I'd love to hear more about how are we as Africans, it's crap traveling to the West as an African, but what is it looking like for Africans traveling in Africa, for Africans trying to belong in a country that's giving them problems accepting them as citizens?
Yeah, I mean, Ciku, you're a traveler as well, so you know this, that when it's good, it's really good. When it's good, it's so good. And then when it's not good, it's worse in some ways. I really wanted African, when I was writing the book, in my head, I was writing for African women. Like I was thinking about African women and having a conversation with African women, because I really want to see more African women like you, like just traveling on the continent and trying to talk to people and see people and we need to, I think, as part of demanding our own space for complexity and for richness, like we just need to travel more on the continent. I think, like I said, it's a complete mixed bag. You have countries like Rwanda, Ethiopia before the war, Senegal, just opening up their borders and saying, Ghana, come, 90 days, 30 days, because most people, that's what they want. They just want 90 days, 30 days, be a foreigner, be a tourist, but also not be alienated, right? There's an alienation that happens when we travel to other places that doesn't really happen when you're traveling between African countries. So there's that. But then when, like I said, when it's bad, it's really bad.
Yeah.
If you are a Somali person living in Kenya, you're going to have an experience of Kenya that is very different from a Rwandan person who will experience Kenya. And I also wanted to be honest about that, because I was in Kenya. You remember when we had the, I think it was in 2015, 2016, Kasarani, when they rounded up Somali people and put them in Kasarani.
Yeah.
And the context that makes that possible. I wanted us to have an honest reckoning with the context that makes that possible. I wanted South Africans to have an honest reckoning with the context that makes these, every 2 years, someone is burning Somali shops, Ethiopian shops. Like, I wanted us to have an honest reckoning with that. Because I think there's this idealized image of Africans in Africa as being like all great all the time. And I just really wanted to sit in that sort of assumption and different directions and be like, is this actually true? Is it untrue? Like, is it completely untrue? And where I ended up was it's mixed. Sometimes it's fantastic. I always have a great time in Senegal. I always have a great time. When I was in the DRC in Goma, I had a great time in Goma. But then I've had really difficult experiences in Africa as well. And Togo, I had a really difficult time in Togo. And that's what I want people to get from that I don't like this idea of what is the word I'm looking for? That Africa is this big, solid block of nondescript, everything is always identical. I wanted people to really, if there was anything that people will conclude from reading those essays, is to look back and say, hey, it's really complicated.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, and I'll add two anecdotes. So in 2014, I was backpacking I took a solo trip it was through Ivory Coast, Togo, Benin, Burkina Faso, and I remember I was getting my visas in Ivory Coast, and the process was a nightmare. I had a friend, an Ivorian friend, and her Burkinabe boyfriend who were helping me do the process. I think I went to the Burkinabe embassy 5 times, and every time it was just one stupid request after another. Other times they asked me, you as a Kenyan, why are you going to Burkina Faso? It was so ridiculous. And finally, one time, my Ivorian friend, she got so mad at the embassy and she yelled, she said, Thomas Sankara ne pa mo pusa. Like, Thomas Sankara did not die for this. And I said, I will never get a visa at this rate. But anyway, finally I got a visa. And then as you said, when you go to places, I went to Burkina Faso and people were so nice. The whole
so nice.
Yeah, they're the nicest people ever. They were like, what? You're from Kenya. You came to our country just to visit, like not for humanitarian. I said, yeah, just to visit. The guy I stayed with, I couch surfed. He had like maybe 700 people who had stayed with him according to like couch surfing ranking. He said I was the first African. This was in Jala. So he said I was the first African he'd ever had stay with him. So I wondered, like, our interaction with immigration makes it so bad, and then you go to the countries and you have a good experience, and you wonder, why are we treating each other like this?
Why? I mean, that's absolutely right. I had exactly the same experience with Burkina Faso, actually, because I got my Burkina visa in Togo, and it was the same thing. It's like, come back tomorrow, bring this back. Come back tomorrow, bring this. And I'm like, it's a 7-day trip. Like, what?
It's not that
here's
serious.
my return ticket. It's not that serious. And then from the moment I got on the bus, it was a completely different, like, oh my God, you're from Kenya. I've never met a Kenyan before. You have to come to my house. You have to come and eat at my house. I didn't buy food the entire time I was in Ouagadougou. Didn't buy any food. It's like, no, you have to come and have breakfast with us. No, she's having breakfast with us. She'll come to your house tomorrow. And I was like, okay, wait, you guys don't even know me. As a Kenyan, as a Nairobian, you're like,
you wouldn't eat food from strangers.
You wouldn't eat food from strangers. So it's like you have to suspend the Nairobian part of your head. And you're like, okay, you're not in Nairobi anymore. You're not in Nairobi anymore. But it's exactly that. It's often so different. I would say the same thing about South Africa in many ways, that when you think about just the process of the visa all the way until the airport. It's so demoralizing. It's so demoralizing. And then, for me, especially in Johannesburg, I always have a really good time in Johannesburg because I think
Yeah.
Josie has just such an amazing vibe, an amazing energy, but it's complicated. It's not always just going to be one thing. I think how do we make space for people to actually get to the good parts? I think it's something that as Africans, people who are in the government, people who are in the bureaucracy really have to start thinking about. Even when you think about like when you land in Kenya, right? And the immigration lines, and it's like, it's always like, why are the people who are applying for visas being treated better than the rest of us who are in the COMESA line and in the EAC line and the whatever? There's something about the way in which these logics just become accepted. This is, how we treat each other because this is how Western countries treat us. That I think people just need to cut it out, basically.
I know with 5 minutes to go, I would love us to switch to something else you talk about, which is images. So two parts to this question. One is, one, you given the story about how Alan Kurdi and his brother and their bodies being found at the Turkish beach. Those pictures are that picture is so depressing, but how that was what was needed for people to say it's terrible that boats, ships are being sent back with migrants who are so desperate, or not migrants, actually refugees who are so desperate and they're drowning in the sea. And this is why this little boy had to die this way. He didn't have to die that way. So you talk about such images. You also talk about images that come from terror attacks and how those are used. So that's one part of the images question. But the second part is a bit more positive. It's kind of like the images you've seen and then the stereotypes that have been behind them. When you've traveled, how have this been dispelled? So like some of your positive Africa travel stories, or even positive stories of how you ended up in Palermo and you worried that people would be racist, but no one really cared about it. So so let's discuss images and travel and the importance of them.
Look, with the Alan Kurdi photographs, look at what's happening in Haiti now with the Haitian refugees crossing. A lot of people might not realize that Haitians cross the Gulf, the Florida Gulf, to get to, that's how they get to a lot Mexico, because Haiti is an island. So they get to Mexico, that's how they get to Florida. Exactly the same context. Desperate people, there's been an earthquake, there's been an assassination of the president, there's a pandemic, desperate people putting their kids on a boat. Warsan Shira, nobody puts their kids on the water unless the water is safer than the land. And do that, and then they get horsewhipped, whipped on the
like slaves. Those pictures
like
look
slaves.
like images of slaves.
Yeah, but you see, what people don't realize is those pictures were part of a whole series of months of these arrivals happening. So the pictures did what was necessary to get people to pay attention to this crisis, because the crisis had been going on and nobody was really, in the US especially, was really paying attention to, unless you were paying attention to Haitian, like people who work with Haitian refugees, people who work with Haitian migrants generally knew. But if you were watching Haitian news, you knew. But ordinary people had no idea that this was happening. So it got everybody's attention. It got the Biden government, it embarrassed them. It got them to change their policy. It got them to take a step back. And then everybody's attention moved on. And now Haitians are still arriving and there's no protection and there's, less access because people don't want images like that to get out again. So I really wanted that essay to really underscore to people that we need to think about this stuff a little bit more critically. And it's one of those ones that I wrote, and I said it multiple times in the essay, I don't have the answer for this one. I just know that it's a pattern that needs to be paid attention to, that people are drowning and dying, and Gulf of Mexico, Mediterranean Sea, South Asian Sea, like right now, there are thousands of people who are on the move on these bodies of water, and there's no attention being paid to them, not to mention the people who are on the move on the land, until there's a crisis like this. There's an Alan Kurdi kind of image that reminds us that the people who are doing this, who are taking these risks, who are vulnerable, are human beings just like the rest of us. So I think images can be very powerful. I think images can center our attention and focus our attention. My concern is that people become desensitized to images, that over time you stop, like I gave the example of the South Sudan war. Over time, you stop being shocked at a scale of depth, and then it just becomes something that happens over there. And from an advocacy perspective, it's like, wow, well, you know, what am I left with? How do I tell stories in a way that moves people to action? So that was one of that. In terms of images that have changed me, I feel like the Haitian cases, I think I write about how my experience of Haiti changed me, fundamentally changed me, because I went into Haiti with the image of Haiti that's in the pop, you know, Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. Like people, it's like now in news, that's Haiti's name. It's not just Haiti, it's Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. That's the name of the country. And it was like, yeah, I was like, this place is amazing. These people are amazing. The food is amazing. The culture is fantastic. It's a difficult place. I'm not going to paper over the fact that it is a difficult place, and there was a lot of difficulty, but the Haiti that's in the popular culture is not the complete story. And I love that social media is helping Haitians tell a different side of the story, which is we didn't do this to ourselves. We didn't wake up one morning and decide that we were going to destroy our country. This is what it means to be the weakest country in the shadow of the most powerful empire in the world. And yeah, I think if people saw, I took photographs and I talked about it, you know, I took a lot of photographs in Haiti and I would put them on my Facebook account, and my friends would be like, that's Haiti? Like, yeah, Haiti is a Caribbean island. The beaches are stunning. The street art is out of this world. You know, like people are like, oh, I didn't expect that. You know, skating, I went to the main square and I went to Carnival and people were dancing. And people were like, oh, those people are happy. I would never have put that together. I'm like, yeah, they're human beings. And it's an amazing place. And I think that's it. And like I said, I really had African women in mind when I was writing this book, because I feel like we all benefit so much from people thinking about our countries differently, that I hope that we can also do the same for other people. I mean, and I think you know this, you know, you travel a lot, so you know this, how Africa is so much more than, you know, when I tell people I'm going backpacking in Burkina Faso, they're like, why? Oh, there was a coup there. Yeah, in 1987. It's been a couple of years, you know. And so, yeah, I would say for sure, the images that I have in my mind of Haiti are so different from the images that are produced about Haiti.
And I think one thing you say that's so interesting now is just the fact that how you also see, and I think that's why a book like this is so important, hearing the perspective of a Black African woman, because also how you see these countries, what will be written on Lonely Planet is essentially written by white men. So they'll say this place is super dangerous, but this other place is okay, and they're saying that place is okay because there's other, you know, white people there. But your experience as an African, some places you will get by a bit easier, and you will understand the nuances, and you might look at somewhere and say, yes, this part of town is rough, but Nairobi too has its, you know, it's dangerous sports. This place is no more dangerous. People are friendly here. People are kind, and all those things I think are best seen from your perspective as a Black African woman who's traveling and who comes from places that have been stereotyped before. Because it makes me think when you're saying how Haiti was surprising people. I had the same experience in Comoros. All I knew about Comoros before going was Comoros is one of the poorest countries on the continent. Comoros is beautiful. Comorian people are so kind. Comoros looks like Seychelles. I've never been to Seychelles, but when you see all those pictures of exotic beautiful islands, that's what Comoros looks like. But all you ever hear about Comoros is coups, poverty. They're always ranking the worst on indicators. And I needed to go there myself to see that.
Yeah, and part of the problem with Comoros is it's always compared to Mayotte. It's always like, oh, but the place that stayed French is so, you know, bougie and whatever, and so all of these people don't have, and it's always that comparison. And like you said, there's you're not like, I'm not going to these islands to go buy things that you can get in Paris. I'm going to experience a culture that has people or a vibe that's been cultivated over time. But that's whenever you read the Comoros, it's always in the context of, oh yeah, but Mayotte, they never left France, and look at how they have all of these markers of Frenchness, and so they must be better than the people who stayed. And I just I want us to really have also our own spaces to write about travel and to write about what it is to be a Kenyan woman in the Comoros, and to be a Kenyan woman in Burkina Faso, to be a Senegalese woman in Rwanda. There's a friend of mine who's doing a fantastic magazine, Off To, I don't know if you've heard about it, Liz Gumi. And she basically, every edition is a different African city, but it's written entirely by local writers, photographers, and things like that. So she's done 2 editions so far, Accra and Kinshasa. And Kinshasa, especially because I'd been to Kinshasa a number of years ago. Kinshasa is another one of those. Like it's not an easy town by any measure, but the way people describe Kin, you're like, as a Nairobian, if you it feels familiar because you're like, yeah, Nairobi's hard, but Nairobi is also, you know, Sanford's at 2 a.m. after you've been on the raid. Nairobi is also, you know, the Nairobi National Park. Nairobi is also walking through Karura Forest in the afternoon. Nairobi is also, you know, all of these old buildings. It's the Macmillan Library. You know, it's all of these. I love, my favorite thing in Nairobi right now is on Sunday afternoon, when all of those kids are, I mean, it's a sign of something else, because I feel it's also a sign that there's no public spaces left in a lot of places.
They were stolen.
But you always see these skateboarders and people taking content for their IGs. So they dress up to the nines and they just are walking around the CBD, taking pictures and being photographed. And I love that. It's so amazing to be in Nairobi on a Sunday afternoon. And I feel like now that I've said it, people are going to ruin it. Please don't ruin it. It's also a symptom, obviously, that there's no public spaces left in much of the city. That now that they've closed the parks for 3 months, where are people supposed to gather? Like, we have almost no public spaces left. But anyway, the story is basically that Liz is trying to do this, is trying to put this series to kind of speak back to this paradigm of travel writing and be like, actually, here is what travel writing looks like when it's written by the people who are from the place. This is what they want you to know about themselves. Beautifully photographed, beautifully laid out, and more. I just want to see more of that. And I as a traveler, those are the people who I want to hear to tell me, okay, you're coming to Accra. Let me tell you where you need to go and do this. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And I know we're out of time. So before just ending the conversation, I want you very quickly to tell me your top 3 travel destinations, and for each, just a sentence. Just a sentence. If you say this place because this place because this place because this, then we'll head over to Q&A.
You're really putting me on the spot.
No pressure, but you have 1 minute.
My favorite place to date is the last place that I traveled to, which is northern Kenya. I went to Sibiloi National Park by motorcycle. And it was one of the best things that I've ever done in my life. So right now, because it was the most recent. Number 2, I would have to say Ansira Bay in Madagascar. It's in the middle of the island, and there's a lake called Lac Chichivia. And Lac Chichivia is like Lake Kivu. It's also one of those lakes where every couple of years there's a gas explosion and then it kills everything off and then life starts again. But it is one of the most clearest lakes I've ever seen in my life. And going diving, in Lac Chichivia, amazing. I think Ansira Bay and the food, Madagascar, where there is food. Oh my God.
And the rum.
Oh,
the rum orange.
I mean, honestly, if I wasn't, I would write a whole book about Madagascar just based on the rum. But Madagascar in general, I think everybody should try and get to Madagascar at one point.
I agree.
And the third place, I would say Mexico City.
Ah,
Mexico City is amazing. History, culture, food. Um, Mexico is so much more than how it is represented in popular culture. It's one of the most diverse countries in the world. It's got one of the most fascinating histories, and Mexico City is where so much of this stuff comes together, just like any other capital. So my third choice would be Mexico City.
nice. Thank you so much. So now we'll head over to Q&A. I think we might be getting questions through social media, if I'm not wrong. So let's see what's come through our social media. I don't see anything yet on my end.
It's okay.
Anything on your end?
I guess we didn't get any questions.
Okay, so great. Thank you so much. And before we wind down, I just want to, and before we conclude this session, I'd like to thank the people that made this event possible. Sharjah World Bank Capital, Sigrid Rousing Trust, the Embassy of the Netherlands in Nairobi, and all of the wonderful colleagues at Book Bank who have worked for months to deliver this festival. So thank you so much, Nanjala, for sharing this for sharing your experiences with us. It's been such an honor and such a joy. It's always amazing speaking to you.
Absolutely.
And we don't take it for granted. Asanteni sana to our audience for logging in and conversing with us. And we hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you.
It's
Bye.
okay. All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.